of the St. Lawrence River, a giant passenger liner was making its way toward England. The night was calm, the river was quiet, passengers were asleep, and then a thud. Not the violent crash you'd expect from one of history's deadliest shipwrecks, just a heavy bump. Most passengers barely reacted. The lights stay on, the ship is still moving. For a few seconds, nothing feels wrong. Then the floor begins to tilt. At first, people think it's just the aftermath of the collision. A minute later, they're struggling just to stay on their feet. 5 minutes later, the lights go out. 14 minutes after that first bump, the entire ship is gone. More than 1,000 people never make it off. So, how can a ship this big disappear in just 14 minutes? On May 28, 1914, the Empress of Ireland left Quebec City on what should have been a routine overnight voyage to England. She was one of Canada's finest passenger liners. Nearly 1,500 people were on board. Families, business travellers, crew. More than 100 members of the Salvation Army heading to an international conference. Shortly after 1:30 in the morning, the river pilot left the ship. Captain Henry Kendall took over for the trip down the St. Lawrence River. The weather was calm. Most passengers were asleep. Then, fog rolled in. That wasn't unusual. Captains on the St. Lawrence dealt with fog all the time. The Empress slowed and began sounding its whistle. Somewhere ahead, another ship was approaching. It was a Norwegian cargo ship called the Storstad. Unlike the Empress, the Storstad wasn't built for comfort. It was built for strength. Its bow was reinforced with thick steel so it could break through sea ice. That design would soon become incredibly important. Through the fog, Captain Kendall spotted the Storstad's lights. He adjusted course to pass safely. The captain of the Storstad made his own adjustment. Neither realized they were making the same maneuver. Then, the fog became so thick they lost sight of each other completely. Seconds later, the Storstad suddenly emerged from the darkness. There wasn't enough time to avoid it. At 1:56 a.m., its reinforced bow struck the Empress on the starboard side. Passengers expected a violent impact. Instead, many described it as little more than a heavy jolt. That was the cruel part. The collision didn't feel catastrophic, but beneath the waterline, it was. The Storstad's steel bow tore a massive hole into the side of the ship. Investigators later estimated that around 60,000 gallons of water were rushing through that opening every second. The Empress immediately began listing to starboard. Captain Kendall ordered the watertight doors closed. If they could seal off the flooded compartments, the ship might survive. But there was a problem, one most passengers never knew existed. The watertight doors weren't automatic. Every single one had to be closed by hand. Crew members rushed below deck. But flooding was spreading faster than they could move. Some doors never closed, others became impossible to reach. Within minutes, the list became even worse. Then investigators discovered something that made the flooding even more devastating. Many passengers had left their cabin portholes open before going to bed. Normally, that wasn't a problem. But as the ship leaned farther onto its side, those windows slipped below the waterline. Water began pouring directly into cabin after cabin. Now the flooding wasn't coming through just one massive hole. It was entering through dozens of smaller ones as well. And as the ship continued leaning, the ship carried enough lifeboats for everyone. But it didn't matter. You can't launch a boat when the deck is already a cliff face. We tend to look for a villain in these stories, a grand act of negligence, a singular, dramatic failure. But the Empress wasn't a victim of malice. It was a victim of timing. It was a chain of tiny, ordinary decisions. A window left open for a breeze, a door that took too long to reach, a path in the fog. These were the kind of things that happen every day, but on the St. Lawrence that night, they happened all at once.